Many of us have experienced that moment in a quiet room where the world seems to thin out. When people drift out of our lives, despite our best efforts, we usually interpret that silence as a form of rejection or even a punishment. This illustrates a concept called deliberate displacement. While the left side represents a life crowded with erratic noise, the right side shows what happens when that noise is cleared out. This transition creates a specific kind of internal space that didn't exist before. To ground this theory, we can look at Martha. For years, her life was defined by the constant movement of a busy household, a hardworking husband, and an energetic son named Daniel. To understand the true function of loneliness, we have to examine what happens to Martha's internal world when that entire emotional ecosystem abruptly disappears. The shift was total. Her husband passed away after a long winter illness, and as Daniel grew older, his life in the city pulled him further away. Eventually, his visits stopped altogether. Martha was left in a house that suddenly felt too large. The silence was heavy, creating a psychological weight that many would find impossible to carry without slipping into bitterness. At this point, Martha made a specific pivot. Rather than asking to be rescued from the quiet, she looked for a way to be useful within it. She began to focus on the small, immediate tasks she could perform for the world right outside her door. This shift in focus transformed her loneliness. By seeking out small ways to give, she turned a passive state into an active state of service. For Martha, the physical emptiness of her home became secondary to her daily actions. She found that the pain of isolation lessened the moment she identified a new way to be helpful to others. With her world narrowed to her small garden and the dirt road outside, Martha's interactions became hyper-localized. She had to find purpose within a very small radius. She started with micro-investments: bread for the local children, a steady hand for a stray dog, and a willingness to listen to the small, everyday worries of her neighbors. These acts functioned as compounding social capital. Martha acts as a central node, sending slow pulses to dormant neighbors. Her silent home gave her bandwidth to be present. Over time, these individual pulses link up, forming a dense, invisible web of connection. Martha was methodically building a community infrastructure. While she lived alone, her daily service created a network of people who now relied on her presence as much as she relied on their purpose. This quiet ecosystem was eventually challenged when Daniel returned from the city. He brought with him a restless energy that clashed with the stillness Martha had cultivated. Daniel viewed his mother's life through a traditional lens. To him, a successful life required noise and visible company. He saw her quiet service as a sign of failure, warning her that her efforts would leave her forgotten. Martha disagreed. She believed that as long as she was actively projecting love outward, she was participating in a life that was effectively crowded, even if the house was silent. The reality of her network was put to a stress test when Martha became severely ill. She could no longer work in her garden or provide the bread and stories the village had come to expect. The response was immediate. The children she had fed and the neighbors she had listened to rushed to her home. They brought soup, medicine, and constant care, filling the house and proving that Martha's years of quiet work had created a permanent place for her. This showed Daniel that the strength of a community is often built in the quietest moments. It only becomes visible when the person who built it is the one in need. Following her recovery, Martha moved into Daniel's apartment in the city. She traded her open countryside for a dense, high-traffic urban environment. This move triggered the paradox of proximity. Despite the thousands of people living just a few feet away, Martha felt a deeper loneliness in the apartment than she ever had in her quiet village home. Daniel, finally recognizing how his mother functioned, looked for a way to reconnect her to a community. He took her to a local orphanage that was struggling to manage the needs of dozens of children. Martha immediately began cooking and providing the same steady, quiet presence she had offered her neighbors. She stepped back into her role as a caregiver, and the crushing isolation of the city apartment vanished. This fluid model shows how Martha's life functioned.
When her traditional outlet in the village was blocked by her illness and move, that internal drive for purpose didn't disappear. It pressurized until it found a new, even larger outlet at the orphanage. These periods of silence act as a form of preparation. They clear away the interference of a busy life, allowing an individual to be repositioned for a different and often more significant kind of service. When the world goes quiet, it isn't necessarily a loss. It is the clearing of the path so you can become the support system for someone else's crisis.